So let's start with, can you tell us your name, the year you were born, and the branch of service you were in?
Well, I was in the Navy, naval aviation, bombardier navigator in the A6 intruder for the most part. I also flew in the A3. I started in the A3 as a bombardier navigator. I was born August 13th, 1934.
And what years were you active duty?
Uh, I actually enlisted in May of 1958, but I didn't go into active duty until August when I went to OCS,
Which was where?
Newport, Rhode Island.
Okay. I didn't know that. I thought it was Florida.
It used to be, yeah.
Okay. And what theater were you in? What were you in? What were you in combat?
Oh yeah, it was all Vietnam.
Okay. And your main role while you were in the service was as a BN, right?
Yep.
Can you just say that?
Yeah, I was a bombardier navigator, BN, in A3s and A6s.
Okay. All right. So let's cover a little bit of your background. Um, I just want to ask you where you grew up and maybe describe your childhood, your early childhood, and let's first start with your parents. What were their names and?
My dad was Walford Bean, and my mom, Anna Jane Hole, Hohl Bean. Dad was a mining engineer, and a pretty damn good one. He did a lot of work overseas, down in Bolivia, where I lived the first 4 years of my life, La Paz. And then he was doing consulting work for the U.S. government and sent over to India and Asia to analyze their mines after the war and their mining efforts. And he was published in a lot of different languages and eventually wound up in the Mining Engineer Hall of Fame.
And where was that after Bolivia? They moved to Minnesota, right?
Actually, up to Michigan, where I spent the first 3 years of school, kindergarten through third grade. And then he moved to, during the war, he moved to the iron mines up in Minnesota, where he was superintendent of mines.
And eventually, he taught geology at.
He taught mining engineering. This was another thing about Dad. He never had a postgraduate degree, but he was highly thought of within the industry. And when the Michigan College of Mines, his alma mater, lost its accreditation, they turned to Dad. So he went up there, took over as chairman of the department, and turned the school around and got accredited and got it back up to one of the better mining schools in the country. He was a great man.
Yeah. And so, where were your high school years spent? How did you?
High school years were spent in Chisholm, Minnesota, up in the Mesabi Iron Range, about 75 miles north of Duluth.
Okay. And you have a brother and a sister too, right?
I have two brothers and a
two
sister.
brothers.
Yeah, one brother died about 4 years ago. And then I have another brother. Both my brothers were in the Navy. One is in submarines and one was surface. And of course, I was aviation. And Dad, never having been to sea, wondered where in the hell he went wrong. And his sister, or his daughter, my sister, married a marine aviator. So we had quite a nautical family, I guess.
Were you closest children or?
Not really. My brother, younger brother, was 5 years younger. We all got along and still get along very well. But my sister was 12 years younger. My other brother was 11 years younger. So when I was in high school, they were still infants, essentially, but 5, 6 years old.
And then after high school, kind of where did you go after high school?
Oh, well, that summer I spent working as a surveyor assistant, working highway surveys for Minnesota. And then I went to Harvard and I spent about 8 months there, and I guess I didn't like it. I just didn't fit in. I don't know. But anyway, I dropped out. And then worked in Upper New York State for about 6 months. Went back to school at Carleton. And I'm not really a student. I love to read and everything else, but in those days I just was not oriented towards academics. So I just got up and at the end of my junior year, stuck up my thumb, wound up in Montana doing surveying there, and for oil surveying. And then that contract ran out in January, so I stuck up my thumb and hitchhiked back down to Houston, got a job there with the same company. They sent me to Louisiana, south of New Orleans, in the wild Cajun country down there. It's pretty interesting. And then I went back to Houston, got promoted into an office job, and I was doing office work for about, I guess 4 or 5 months. And I got to thinking about going back to school, and at the same time, the company offered me a hell of a position to go down as a party chief in Cuba. This was pre-Castro days. And it was a hell of a good salary, about $12,000, which is a hell of a lot in those days. Plus all expenses paid, and, I really thought that over. But I had 3 years of college, and I didn't want to really waste that. So I went back to college, got my senior year, graduated in 1958.
So what prompted your move towards service?
Oh, World War II. I, of course, was 7 years old when the U.S. entered the war in 1941. And I was old enough to realize what was going on, and all the movies and everything else. And it seemed like I really wanted to fly. But I was attracted more towards naval aviation than I was to the Air Force. I don't know, it just seemed the thing to do, roaming around on carriers, flying on and off of carriers, getting into exotic foreign lands, plus the fact you had a lot of combat. So I just became enamored of naval aviation and wanted to do that.
But at the time you joined, we weren't engaged in a war.
No.
So you didn't do it to avoid the draft or anything?
Well, not to avoid the draft, because I was drafted, but I enlisted before I opened up my draft notice in the Navy, because everyone had to serve in those days. It was a obligated service of 2 years, and I didn't want to go Army. I wanted to go Navy, so I just went in the Navy and went to flight training, and I just decided on a career. I loved it.
So the jump from college to the Navy, how did that happen?
Well, I had been taking my flight training tests 3 or 4 times. I failed it each time because of an astigmatism in my eyes. And finally, I went up to NAS Minneapolis, and for one last time, and they said, "Look, Mr. Bean, you've been here 4 times, you failed it 4 times. Why don't you just go to OCS to satisfy your obligation and go Black Shoe, or Surface Navy?" So I said, yeah, okay. So I did. I went, and about halfway through OCS, I found out that there was a program for reserves as crewmen in attack aircraft, such as bombardier navigators, okay? So I volunteered for that. They tried to talk me out of it because they said there's no future in it. There is no field as such for careers in the Navy. But I went anyway and became a bombardier navigator and got my wings as such in 1958 or 59 up at Whidbey Island, Washington. And then all of a sudden I passed the test again for flight training, so I got my orders for flight training and went down there, reported in January 4th, 1960. And I got pretty well through the program. I soloed and I was able to do pretty good high work, but I couldn't land I could land on runways, but I couldn't land on precision landing spots. And it was due, in good part, I guess, to my astigmatism that I had. So I went back to being a bombardier, went down to Sanford in 1960, made 2 cruises, and then I also made a cruise on the Independence at Gitmo when doing the Cuban Missile Crisis. And our job, we loaded up with live weapons, and our job was just to fly around the perimeter of Guantanamo Bay. At that time, it was a naval base. And fly around the perimeter, and if they shot at us, we were to drop our bombs on them. Not inside the perimeter, but outside.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about your service.
Sure.
So we kind of talked a little bit about how you came to join, and how you ended up. How did you end up? I mean, you could have gone a lot of different ways in the
Right.
Navy. How did you end up with the A6?
Of course, as I said earlier, I was in the A3s as a bombardier navigator, and in my years at Sanford, I managed to do pretty well, and I was one of the top bombardier navigators in Sanford. And this gave me quite a good step up the ladder. So when I came up for shore duty, they called me in and said, "Hey, Ted, we're going to send you up to VA-42 to bring the A2F at the time in the old designations. A stood for attack, F stood for Grumman aircraft, and 2 was the second attack aircraft being built by Grumman, second type. So anyway, they're going to send me up to the A2F to bring the A2F into the fleet. So I gladly accepted that job. Reported into NES Oceana in February of 1963. And I spent the next 3 years in VA-42 training, being trained, and in turn training the initial squadrons to be inducted into the fleet.
So, were you kind of the pioneer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there are 12 crews, 12 bombardiers and 12 navigators. Bombardiers all out of A3s, and 12 pilots all out of A4s. And they combined us in VA-42, and we had no idea what crew concept was. I did, because I had flown in a crew. But the A4 pilots didn't so much, but they readily accepted us. And the A6 became, what eventually became the A6, became quite an excellent demonstration of crew concept. The pilot and the BN only flew about 6 inches apart, and in side-by-side seating in the aircraft. And communication was very close between us. And oftentimes, it was reduced. We didn't use ICS. It was just, we knew. It was just hand signals. We knew what had to be done, and went ahead and did it. And the crew concept, I think, was really born out of this, and carried on into the airlines eventually.
So, just real quick about the A6. What was so special about it? What made it unique in their?
Well, the A6 was the first aircraft ever designed. It came out as a result of the Korean War, when the Koreans were moving supplies and stuff around by night, and we had no night bombing capabilities, except to go over and drop some flares and try to find them, and drop bombs by flare light. Well, Navy said we'll go a step farther. So they put out a request for proposals, and Grumman won the bid and designed the A6. An ugly airplane, but one that you really grew to love. And so did the rest of the services, because it became an excellent close air support aircraft, although it didn't have any guns. But we could get right down in the dirt and do close air support for the people in South Vietnam mostly. And we did about, in Vietnam, we did about 80% of our work at night. It had two radars. It had a search radar, and then when you found the target and came in close, it had a track radar, which you were supposed to be able to turn on, and it was able to precisely track the target and figure out your bombing solution. Well, it didn't work quite well, because on some targets like bridges, what it did was seek the electronic center of the target. And when you got on a bridge, the electronic center kept moving as you came in, kept moving away, so eventually the track radar would end up out in infinity somewhere. So you turn it off and go back to search radar and use the search radar as the bombing instrument. But anyway, back to your original question. It was the first aircraft developed in any military inventory, including the Israelis, the Brits, or anybody else, to be solely designed for night interdiction work.
What was your do you remember your first mission, wartime mission?
Oh, well, yeah. I flew with Bill Westerman, and we, I don't know, I wasn't very nice to Jan, my wife at the time, but I mean, I don't mean it that way, but let me tell the story. On Christmas Day in 1965, we were, not Christmas Day, about a week before Christmas, we were decorating the Christmas tree, and all of a sudden, Commander Swiss Sneed, who is a skipper of BA-42, called up. He said, "Hey, Ted, BA-85 just lost an aircraft yesterday, and they need a new aircraft and a new crew. They lost the crew also." It was Ed Goldman, and so anyway, he said, "Would you like to go?" I said, "Hell yes, send me, I'm ready." And hung up the phone, and Jan says, "Who's that?" And I says, "Hey, it was Swiss Sneed. Guess what, I'm going to Vietnam." Well, that was the wrong way to put it. And she broke out in tears, and of course, then I realized what I had done. And so we just kind of talked about it. And I said, "I'm going to have to go sometime anyway, so might as well do it right now." So Bill Westerman and I flew the plane over and landed over there, and they crewed us up as a crew. So we flew our first mission. I had flown a lot with Westerman in the RAG. And my first mission was against a target in Cape Moi in North Vietnam, just on the coast. We never got any fire or anything, but that was our break-in. And that was our first mission, nighttime.
I'm sorry, you said a power, what was the target?
Cape Duong, I think, was the target. Cap Duong.
Okay. Is that a base?
It was a munition storage site.
Okay. So, what was the typical day like during the war on a carrier when you're stationed off the coast? What was the typical day when you got you had the briefing, the planning? Can you describe it?
Yeah, well, there were sometimes 4 carriers on station in the Gulf of Tonkin, but most of the time there were 3. And we just kind of rotated around, but I flew missions most every day. Some days were down south in South Vietnam, and probably about 15% of our missions, and the rest of them were up in North Vietnam. The day was not really a day as you think of a day, because we flew at night a lot, so we would sleep during the day or do some mission planning, training, ground training and whatnot. And then plan our mission, brief, fly the mission, usually land about 2 or 3 in the morning back on the carrier. And there are times when they would cancel complete flight schedule, especially when we were on the night schedule. They would cycle it around the carrier. So one carrier was at rest. The next carrier was doing day cycles, and the next carrier was doing night cycles. Well, we were the only carrier over there with A6s, and the carriers doing night cycles said, why are we doing night cycles when you got A6s? So we essentially did a lot of the night cycles in the Kitty Hawk. And the day was a little inverted, a little reversed, but we got good support from the ship, and they kept the wardrooms open for us so we could eat breakfast at 8 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock at night, dinner in the morning, and then we'd sleep for a while and then get up and do as a naval officer, aviator, you not only fly, but you also have a job as usually everyone has a division, which is a crew of men, like the mechanics or the aviation electronic people or the electrical people, whatnot. I have about 20 to 30 men, and as a junior officer, you had a division. So you had to go down and visit the division and see how the boys were doing, check out that everything was okay with them, they were being treated right, and there was no problem with that on Kitty Hawk. But you also had to write their evaluations and just, in general, see to their well-being. So you had to do that in addition. And then I was also the Bombardier Navigator Training Officer for the squadron. So about 3 or 4 times a week I would hold ground training for the Bombardiers. And that was about the extent of our day.
Did you have any downtime ever? Or?
Yes, yeah. We got rest periods, probably fly for about 4 or 5 days and then take a 24-hour break while the other carriers took up the jobs. And then go back to flying again. But we were at sea. Usually the line period consisted of 6 weeks. So we were at a line period in combat for 6 weeks, and then we got a break and usually went into QB Point in the Philippines and spent maybe a week or 10 days there. But we get a break sometimes and get up to Hong Kong, Singapore, and some other exotic ports over there, and then back to the line again. So it was, even though we lost those airplanes, we lost a lot of airplanes because it was just inexperience on the part of everybody. First of all, the A6 was rushed into combat so quickly. Excuse me. Yeah, thank you. Excuse me.
Sorry.
The A6 was rushed back into combat so quickly that, or rushed into combat, I should say. It was a brand new airplane, and from the induction in the fleet in '63, it only had 2 years before it made its first deployment, VA-75 in 1965. The test and evaluation squadrons did not have a chance to work it out, and as they should do with all the other, work out combat maneuvers, combat training, and so on. The A6 never had any of that because of, again, the rapid induction into the fleet and into combat. So what we developed our own tactics as we went on in combat and tried new training methods, two new bombing methods and several different things, and also bombing formations. The standard bombing formation up to this time was just string in, and we usually went 4-plane sections, and the number 1 lead plane usually got by pretty well. But that just woke them up. And the number 4 plane usually got pretty badly shot up. And we went through a lot of losses. Inexperience of the crews flying at 450, 500 knots at 400 feet, 200 feet. Just a little jar of the stick is enough to kill the airplane. And there are a lot of distractions. Flak, missiles flying all over the place, and the missile launch at night is almost like Cape Canaveral. And it would jar your attention away like this. You couldn't help but look at it, and maybe a little jar on the stick, and that was it. You're in the ground. So we lost a lot of airplanes. But we learned as we went along. And
Can I lead you into what you were awarded the Silver Star for?
oh, sure.
You were talking about bombing tactics.
Yeah. The bombing tactics we used, as I said, were streaming targets, and that didn't work out very well because, as I said, number 4, 3 and 4 really got shot up pretty bad. So I was thinking one night, I was laying in bed in my stateroom about this, and then I realized that the A6 I realized that the A6 had a capability nobody else had ever had, and that was reading out the range very accurately to the target because it's based on radar. And so I got to thinking about it, and I said, hey, why don't we take off under MCON conditions, no radio communications whatsoever, and just independently, not join up or anything, just independently go out, and then we'll come at the target from 4 different cardinal directions, one from the east, one from the west, north and south. And we were able to coordinate because we had the accuracy to the target, see the target, we had the range to the target readout, and so I drew a 5-mile circle and a 10-mile circle around the target. And we tried to program each flight so they arrived at the 10-mile circle at the same time. Well, it was hard to do with precision, so I made a rule. The first one to hit the 10-mile circle would click the radio twice. That made everybody else realize they probably had to come up on the power a little bit to get in there. And then when the first one to hit the 5-mile circle clicked once on the, we never broadcast, just the clicks. And then that click, if everybody else was there, it was okay. Everybody would click back, and then because we're coming in at different altitudes, all 4 at 4 different altitudes, we would go ahead and release, and the release was usually about 2 or 3 miles from the target. It took the bomb that long to travel over the ground to get to the target. So we all would release at the same time, and then everybody would go into a 90-degree break, right break, and pull off the target. And it sounds hairy, but if everybody did it right, it was no problem. And it worked very well. It worked to confuse the gunners and the missileers on the ground, and it just broke everything up and put us back on separate paths back to the ship, and it worked well.
And you flew the first planned.
Yeah.
So it's essentially dropping all the bombs at the same time.
Now we would travel in with, we were capable of carrying, Mark 28 Mark 82s, which were 500-pound bombs, and 15 Mark 83s, 1,000-pounders, and 5 Mark 84 2,000-pounders. So anyway, we did that. And do you want to wait until this done?
No, good.
So we did that, and we were all carrying Mark 84, Mark 82, 500-pounders, and the target was the Tiny Yin steel plant. And I'm not sure if we were the first ones to hit it. I think the Air Force went up during the daytime several times, but they had lousy cloud coverage. And we were in Hong Kong at the time, and got called back to the ship, skipper and myself, and they cleared the A6 to go in nighttime. And we said, oh boy. So we had to stay on the ship and plan and work out our plans, and that's what we did.
Wow.
So when we got back online, the first night back online, why we went ahead and performed the mission. It worked out very well.
Let me ask you, I'm sure there are a lot of them, but what was your scariest moment in combat?
Well, I don't know. That's hard to define. One time we were on a daylight run against a truck park, for crying out loud. 28 airplanes going against a truck park. But that's what McNamara and Johnson said to do, so we did it. But the got hit, just 85 millimeter went off right in front of the aircraft, completely crazed by canopy. And I could not see out of the canopy in front. And then a couple of missile fragments, shell fragments, broke through the canopy and were whizzing around in the cockpit. And one went through my sleeve and my flight suit, and another creased my hard hat. Neither one of us got hit or hurt, but it knocked out a lot of the electronics in there. And so I lost the radar, we lost communication, we lost our radios. I kept my radar, but the rest of the system was shot out. The aircraft had what's called digital integrated navigation bombing equipment. And it took all the track radar, the search radar, the INS, all into one central computer and just mashed it all together to come up with solutions to your navigation and bombing problems. And that all got knocked out. So we were heading back to the ship, and we had also taken, I think it was a 35 millimeter in the wing that went completely through the wing. And so we were leaking fuel, siphoning fuel out of the top of the wing tank, losing a lot of fuel. So we're heading back, no radio, no way of communicating with anybody. We got separated from the rest of the flight and heading back to the ship. And fortunately, the radar was still working. I was able to identify the three carriers, and they're all steaming in formation for recovery, all heading into the wind, so they're all on the same course. They had about 3 or 4 miles separation between the ships. And I just picked out the lead ship. I didn't know whether it was ours or not because we couldn't even tank. We were losing so much fuel, we couldn't take the time to tank. And headed back to the ship, and they had written us off as lost. And we showed up. We didn't have enough to make the standard overhead brake. We came in, started in on a straight, had no radio. Fortunately, the air boss saw us, and he lifted the rest of the landing pattern up into what's called the dog pattern. So clear the way for us. And the skipper, I flew with Ron Hayes, the skipper, put down the flaps, and the left flap went down, but the right flap, it turned out that the hit we had taken in the wing also broke the screw jack for the flap. So it stayed up. This flap went down, this flap stayed up, so the plane rolled as we were coming down on final. And the skipper just pulled the flaps back up, rolled the plane out steady, and 3 seconds later we hit the deck and recovered. We didn't even have time enough to be scared. But I was scared after that. But I think that was the only time an A6 ever made a flap-up landing on a carrier. I'm not sure, but I think it is.
He must have been a good pilot.
He was a great pilot. He was a super guy. Yeah, we got together well as a crew.
Yeah. Cool. I'm gonna kind of wrap up this section.
Okay.
Do you think you talked about anything you want to talk about during the service years?
Well, you know, I made 2 cruises as a bombardier navigator in A3s on Saratoga. And then I made the cruise on the missile crisis on Independence. Then I went into the A6 and made 2 cruises on Kitty Hawk to Vietnam. And then I made another cruise in VA-34 to the Med on Kennedy. So I deployed on quite a few of the ships and in the squadrons. And then I ended up as a fleet indoctrination officer for the Tomahawk and the Fleet Intelligence Center, and also doing all the PSYOP, Navy PSYOP targeting. It was a great career, and I loved it.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, let's talk first of all. What year did you retire?
I retired on March 1st, 1979. Actually, February 28th, yeah.
And prior to that, you know, between the war and retiring, you mentioned.
Yeah, I went back to, I did several tours, different tours. I went back to the, became ops officer VA-42 training squadron. I served on Cardiff 6 as electronic warfare officer on the staff of Cardiff 6 with, well, 3 admirals, Admiral Baldwin, Admiral Holloway, and who's the other one? Yeah. Okay. And then I also did a joint tour down at MacDill Air Force Base as electronic warfare officer for the what's called then the Readiness Command, which handled all the joint training throughout the United States of all 3 services. And I enjoyed that very much. It was great. I partook in a lot of Army maneuvers, and there were only 6 naval officers and 240 Army and about 180 Air Force officers on the on the staff, so I was in a distinct minority. But anyway, it was fun. I enjoyed that. And then I finished up my tour as a Fleet Intelligence Center, Europe Atlantic in Norfolk. And that was a great tour also, because I was the, as I said, the PSYOPs planning officer. I had 6 kids working for me, and we planned all the PSYOP targets for, and missions for the A6s, for the, well, not the A6s, for the whole fleet, the 6th Fleet. And then the, and 2nd Fleet. And then I had to go to, twice a year to what they call deconfliction conferences. And so this took in all the B-52s and everybody else who were delivering nuclear weapons should a nuclear holocaust break out, trying to get coordination between the dropping of the bomb so you wouldn't wipe each other out with a nuclear weapon. And that was interesting. And I thought about that for a while, and I looked at it and I said, I brought up the subject at these joint meetings. I said, what about electronic magnetic interference, EMI? They said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, hey, atomic weapons throw off a lot of electronic radiation, and that's going to interfere with your electronics on board the aircraft. And they kind of sat back and thought, and they said, we never even thought about that. So I said, okay. So I went to Pax River, and they did tests on an A7 and found out that's the way it is. So we had to start including that on the deconfliction quota. And I retired out of there, and you were at the retirement. Admiral Hayes was at Sinclair at the time, found out I was retiring, and said, this guy's going to retire in style. So he did. I had the Sync Lamp Band playing there. It was open to, I had probably about 100 guests coming. And Ron Hayes spoke at my retirement. It was a full-blown formal retirement ceremony. I was piped over the side. It was quite an event. I was very, very proud of that. I was also awarded the Navy Commendation Medal in there.
What is the Navy? What is that?
Navy Commendation Medal is just as it says. It's a commendation for work that you've done, usually non-combat, But I got 2 of those medals for combat work. And what they do is put a V for valor on the ribbon and on the medal, on the ribbon of the medal, just to indicate that. So I got 4 of those. I got 2 for valor and 2 for work that I had done. So I wound up pretty well off. I got a Silver Star, 7 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 22 Air Medals, 4 Navy Commendation Medals, and a Joint Service Commendation Medal for my work down at the Joint Command in Tampa. And the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, 2nd class. So yeah, most everybody got pretty good decorations over there.
Yeah. Well, you earned them. So, just as a general kind of philosophical question, how did the Navy or the war service, how did that kind of change your life, your view on life?
I'm not sure it did that much. I'll be honest with you. I enjoyed combat, and I was doing what I had been training to do for so long. And then come back and train the rest of the kids who had not been in combat for what to do in combat was certainly a very, very rewarding experience. As far as it changed me, I never had PTSD or anything such as that. But yeah, I think maybe, and you all know this, Doug, but I maybe was a little bit quick to jump to conclusions, and maybe I got angry with you guys for maybe not any reason, but anyway, there were some changes, but I think they've all worked out. I've settled down, I've accepted everything, and it wasn't any big thing, I don't think.
Well,
Yeah.
no, and I know, Mom had to deal with a lot when you were
Well,
gone.
good God, poor Jan. It was, yeah, she had to take care of 3 boys, all born within 3 years. And God knows she had her hands full, and God bless her. She was a Navy wife, and she was a true military wife, and she just took care of everything. And she did so well. And I'll tell you what, one of the things, I don't know if you were aware of this, Doug, but one of the things that occurred was I had made a mission that got national attention, and it was brought up on Good Morning America. Lieutenant Ted Bean and Commander Ron Hayes did this, and there was a lot of newspapers that carried the article on it throughout the country. I got hundreds of letters as a result of it. But the bad thing was the anti-war activists, who were just as bad then as they are now, took to calling Jan, and with threatening calls. And, I hope your husband dies. You deserve it. You deserve everything you get. I hope you get killed. I mean, just absolute horrible things that they were saying to her. To the point where the Navy finally, for about 2 weeks, had to send out a security detail to guard the house. I don't know if you remember that or not. But
I do not remember. But I think this kind of leads me into another question, like, the kind of community among Navy aviators and their families.
yeah.
And how that was probably a support system for Mom.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. The naval aviation community is a very tight community. And she received, and we all supported each other. When I got back and the war was still going on, I was CACO, or Casualty Assistant Calls Officer, to two widows. And we helped them survive and get along, and you know who they were. And then we all did that sort of thing. And the wives all supported each other very, very well. There was very little pettiness. You had people who didn't like each other, but they still pitched in to help. So yeah.
So talk a little bit about like the bonds you've created with your fellow aviators.
Oh my God. There's nothing like the bond you create in a two-man crew, sitting side by side and doing this stuff. Ron Hayes and I remained very, very close until his death. And then other people I flew with, Bill Westerman, Earl Wolfgang, Phil Shannon, all those guys. We remained pretty close. And squadron mates, when you're on a cruise and you're doing most of your work as a group in the ready room, and that's the only place you have to go on the ship for communal or communications. You become very close. Your squadron mates are very close. They look out for each other, and there's rivalries. Yes, there is, but and there's some intense rivalries, and some that didn't work out so good. You're going to get that every time anyway. But it was just a good 20, 21 years that I spent in the Navy.
I know, growing up, all of your friends and our friends were Navy
Absolutely.
aviators.
Yeah. I am a lot closer. I have a couple friends out of college that I communicate with once in a while. They're both, well, not anymore. They're both gone now. But that was it as far as college was concerned. My ties were all Navy. And all my friends now are, for the most part, retired naval aviators that I knew and worked with. And of course, after you retire, I worked in Navy contracting for a long while. And I was also very active in the Association of Naval Aviation, which did a lot of work with Congress in trying to further the Navy's interests. I did a lot of work with Tailhook. Well, I was a member of Tailhook. And a lot of military communities such as that.
And did you found the Intruder Association?
Yes, I did. The Intruder Association, yeah. When they finally retired the Intruder in '97, it was in the fall of '97. And when the last flight took off out of Oceana, we had kind of a party for it. And they opened up a Hangar 500 for us. And then the two airplanes, the last two airplanes, A6s at Oceana, were taking off to go out to Davis Mountain, the boneyard. Well, there were about 300 or 400 people in the hangar. And they manned up the aircraft right in front of us. And it was raining, low, overcast. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, almost dark as midnight. It was that bad. And they manned up in the aircraft and then taxied down to the end of the runway, and the runway paralleled the hangar. So when they came down the runway in this driving downpour, overcast, low overcast, and they were taking off at formation takeoff, and as they were rolling down the runway, you could see the rooster tail water being thrown up behind the wheels. And then as they broke ground, they just kind of flew off and flew into the clouds, and they were gone. That was the last of the A6 at Oceana. A very fitting way to go away. And so I asked around, I said, we can't just let this die. For all the times, and then, so J.B. Dadson and a couple others have talked about it, so I formed the association. I wrote up the mission statement and had incorporated as a tax-free organization. I've forgotten the designation for that now.
501(c)(3).
Yeah, 501(c)(3), yeah. And sent out I published a couple newsletters. I printed them up myself, 4-page newsletters, and wrote most of the articles in them. I got some contributing. I got about 3 of those out in about a year. And I was able to garner about 600 members. And then finally, after 3 years, I said, hey guys, I need, who wants to take over? The silence was deafening. So I kept at it until I finally talked Bill Schultz, a Grumman rep, into relieving me of it. And he went on farther with it, and then Roop Owens took over, and then Bill Yarm, and it now is about 2,200 strong. We have annual scholarships that we give out to dependents or children of A6 people, grandchildren and so on. Most of them grandchildren now, I guess. And then it's quite an active organization, one I'm very proud of having.
I think we're kind of wrapping up here, but if you can picture a young person going to look at this video online, what would you like them to take from it?
Oh boy.
I know that's a heavy question.
Nothing more than what I would like my sons and every other son, or sons and daughters actually, to take with them. Just do what you can and do it the best that you can, and just roll with the punches and keep going.